Hi everybody and welcome back to the channel. In this video we are going to be talking about masks, one of Quixel's best features. Now for that we're just going to load a project. I'm just loading a regular project. Remember to have displacement ticked if you don't, and make sure that you add a solid layer. So now that we have our solid layer, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to move this a little bit so we can see what's going on, and I'm going to raise the threshold. As you can see, this is elevating the plane. And what we're going to do is we're going to start applying masks, and you're going to see a lot of changes here. So first, go down here where you can add a mask stack to your layer. And now we're going to go over here so we can add a mask component. Most of the things that I'm going to be talking about in this video are going to be up here in the mask component section. So let's click here and let's see what happens. So we have this little menu and we're going to try them all to see what they all do. But let's start with what I think it's a basic one, which is the pattern. So if you go to pattern, you're going to see that you have square, circle, checker, and gradient. So let's start with square. This is the easy one. So as you can see, the reason why I increase the threshold is so we can have this effect. So pretty much what we're doing right now is we are sculpting somehow the plane that we have here with our displacement. If I go back and I play with the threshold, you're gonna see that these tiles go up and down. Actually, let's not make them as tall. Let's just make it all the way around here. Let's go back to our mask stack. So you're going to see that this mask component has several options. In here we have the repeat, which is how many squares you're gonna want on screen. So as you can see, if I increase this, it's going to change the size of the squares. That's why if you want squares, you have to keep them both X and Y at the same amount. Or if you just need something rectangular, just repeat only one. All right. Now spacing is also something that's really useful. So let's say if we wanted something like that, and we want to separate these a little bit more on the X. We're going to do this. We have spacing on the Y as well, just to separate them as much as we need to. And then we have an offset. So let's say you wanted to make this kind of like a brick wall. You probably wanted to repeat it a bit more on the Y. Let's say over here. And you would like to offset it this way. So this is how you make a brick wall here in Mixer. See, I instantly got a brick wall, and if you want, you can raise those bricks a little bit more just by increasing your threshold. All right, and that's one of the best things about using masks here. Now over down here we have other options that we can take of. By the way, the offset has a horizontal and a vertical alignment. So if I press vertical, you're gonna see that the offset is a little bit different. So let's just leave it at horizontal. We also have this tab over here. It's called Jitter. And in Jitter, the best way to explain Jitter would be with the mask. So I'm actually going to press 0. And 0, as you can see, if you see, this is what changes. Look here where the mouse at is. Right now we're in PBR, so this is showing us our material. If I press 0 on my keyboard, it's going to show me my active mask. So whatever I'm using here, because I can stack several of these. Or if you press number 9, you're going to see this changes to layer mask. Layer mask is going to show me absolutely everything that this layer has. And if you press 0, it's going to show you only what component you are selected on. All right. So if we turn on jitter brightness or brightness jitter, you're going to see that this changes a lot. This just changes the mask. But by changing the mask, you're also changing the height. So if you want to have kind of like, let me go back to material. If you want to have kind of like this brick wall that it's not completely even, you're going to have some bricks going up and down. Jitter is one way to go. So if I diminish the amount, you're going to see that there's difference. Actually, you can tell difference a little bit better if we go back to the mask. So if I diminish the amount, you're going to see that that mask gets clearer and clearer. And remember, what's completely black is what's going to go down, and what's approaching the lighter colors or the white is what's going to be raised up. All right, so you can play with the gradients here and you can give it whatever amount you need to give it. There's also threshold. So threshold means how many of your squares is it going to act on. So as you can see, if I raise my threshold all the way to 1, that means that the amount's not doing anything because there's absolutely no jitter happening. So you need to keep your threshold around a place where you feel comfortable, depending on how much jitter you want to apply here. So I think I'm going to change here. Let's lower the threshold so we have a little bit more variation. And now let's go to the next one. The next one's called gradient jitter. So if I press gradient jitter, you're gonna see that I have a gradient per square or per rectangle or bricks, whatever you want to call them. And you're gonna see that they are not only getting a gradient, but this gradient is creating kind of like a difference in height. It's trying to make more imperfect the surfaces. So this is great if you're trying to design a surface that's been handmade. So usually when bricks are laid, unless they're laid by a machine, they're usually not laid perfectly. And this is a great way to kind of break that perfection over there. So if we keep going and if we play with the amount, you're going to see that this actually changes the angle of some of our bricks. And we have the angle here. So if we just shift the angle, we can shift the angle back and forth in both directions. So you can play with this depending on how you want your bricks to look at. You can also do it by the numbers. If you don't want to move these, you can also just type a number here. There's also threshold, like most of our elements will be having threshold. So that just means how many of your bricks will be affected. And then we have random seed. Random seed is self-explanatory. It's just a random seed that kind of throws in the gradient on randomly on your brick. So you can do here and do this here and select whichever you want. All right, so after that we have size jitter. If I click size jitter, you're gonna see that I have several different sizes now. So jitter means just variations for the purpose of this, and the size is just going to change all around our bricks. Now this is a little bit insane, but maybe you want, you know, something like modern art, and it kind of looks like this. So if we lower the amount, it's actually good if you're making some sort of surface that is made by, like, let's say this is an ancient roadway. They're usually, the bricks will be different, or the rocks, if you wanted to make rocks here, this is also a good way to change that. It has a mount and it has threshold, which does exactly the same effect that we've been seeing that it does on any of the other properties. And we have also random seed, so it really makes them wiggle. Now, over here we have a property called Bevel. And what Bevel does is very self-explanatory. Actually, it bevels. Let me go back to material. So it bevels the surface. So if I increase this, you're gonna see that I have a beveling. So it pretty much allows me to quote unquote model on top of my texture. So as you can see, I'm just changing that square to something more that looks more like a weird pyramid shape. And you can also change the bevel curve down here. So as you can see right now, the bevel curve is at 0. So it's completely straight. But if I change the curve, if you look at over here, if I change the curve to the negatives, it starts curving inwards. And if I change it to the positive, it starts curving outwards. All right. So those are the properties that you could mess with when you're doing a pattern. Now there's also cutout. Cutout is really important. I'm actually going to get rid of that bevel to show you the cutout a little bit better. And if I increase the amount, you're gonna see that everything disappears. So cutout means, again, it kind of self-explanatory. It means it's cutting out some of your geometry inside your pattern. So as you can see, it's just making it disappear, and you can randomize the seed as well. All right. And the beauty of this is tileable. So if I turn on tiling, you can see that this tiles pretty well. So that's one of the best things about Quixel, is that everything you're making procedurally, it will tile. And you can also invert. So if I click invert, you're gonna see that I get this effect right here. And this effect's actually very good for other purposes. Now let's try a circle. So as you can see, the properties change, and now we have different properties for the circle. If you wanted to do something different here, we have repeat. We do have repeat and spacing like we did before. So if you don't want space in between them, or if you just want, that's the beauty of this. You can also make one. If you do the 1 by 1, you can also make one if you wanted to do that. All right. And you can also invert it if you need to, and you do this sort of inset right here. You do this inset on, and this could be good for some sci-fi detail that we'll be talking about in the future. All right, let's change our pattern to checkers. And you're gonna be asking me, well, what is the difference between using checkers and using squares? Checkers are square-ish usually. So the difference between checkers and squares is that you use checkers when you want an effect like this. And let me do 4 by 4. So as you can see, this is the effect that checker is giving us. Let me just put this back to 0. And you can instantly have one raise, one down, one raise, one down, and you'll have it very symmetrically if this is the effect that you are trying to get. So if you offset it, you can get also this effect right here. So let's say you are doing a very specific sort of tiling. The checker pattern will be very good for that. Now let's check the final of the pattern. It's be the gradient. So the gradient, it's pretty much one of the patterns, but I would say it's like one of the modifiers that we can add. There's a modifier called gradient as well. So I usually don't, you probably won't see me using this much as a pattern, but mostly as a modifier, which we'll talk about later. And the way you play with gradient is right now, the angle is completely 0, and we can change the angle. So you can see that this is moving around. And let me change the gradient right here. And as you can see, this is kind of wobbling up and down, and you can see the changes over here as well in the mask. So I'm just doing my gradient sum. If I want it over here, as you can see, this is just a flat color. This is how I'm starting to grow my gradient. So the closer that it is to the center, this is going to make it completely flat, and this is what's going to give it its angle. And as you can see, this is where it's rising, and it's rising on an incline. Okay, like I said, the gradient pattern has a lot of uses, but I usually use mostly the mask modifier, not the pattern per se. All right, let's look at other things. Now, the other important one is going to be the noise. This is something that I will be using a lot when I'm making mixes here in this channel. So let's go by what they do. So if we go into the simplex, you're gonna see that they all have a very particular look. This is how the simplex looks. All right, so as you can see, some familiar properties that we already saw. So we have seed, we have amplitude, we have frequency, and I'm just showing you what each part does. So seed, it just randomizes everything like we've been seeing before. Amplitude means how high it is. So as you can see, if I bring all the way down to 0, there's nothing there. But if I increase, it's going to try to push upwards until it hits the level of the threshold. So that way I would have to increase the threshold around here if I wanted to keep on growing. All right. Now we have frequency, which means how frequently you can see the noise. And we have the properties here of the noise per se. So we have octaves, which again, it's giving it some sort of distortion. We have lacunarity, which is like a variation of that distortion. And we have persistence, which is how much of that detail is gonna go up or down. We can also invert them. All right. And let's try another one. So this is the purling. Let's bring it down. Let's bring the frequency down. The purling is very, I'm not going to say very, but it's kind of similar to the simplex. It's just a little different kind of variation of the noise. But as you can see, we pretty much have the same properties. Now we can go to the whirly, and the whirlies are very interesting. As you can see, right out of the box, the Whirly gives you kind of like this stylized rock. So if I were to make some sort of like stylized, very faceted looking rock, as we can see some art styles that you see in some indie games out there, they have this like nice faceted stylized art that I think is really beautiful. This is one way that you could achieve that if you wanted to with the Whirly. So we have Whirly 1, number 2, which is a little bit different, and we have number 3. All right, they all share the same properties. That's why I'm not gonna go into them because it's all the same and you can play with them. All right, so let's keep going. Now, if you want to get rid of this, just right click and delete. And let's add something else. So as you can see, there are other things that we have here. So you can add a solid mask. This is like a complete one single color, and you can make it completely white or completely black, and you can paint on it later if you wanted to. You can add a paint layer. That's its purpose pretty much. Or if you wanted to hide something. There's also the map. So let me just delete that. There's also map. So map is really important because you can load up whatever you want here. So let's say custom image, I can do layer map. And if I had something in here, so for the sake of this example, let me actually bring an asset. So I just brought an asset to show you the map component. So the map component, as you can see, we can select an image. So you can click here, add an image, and it will pop up a browser. So you can browse for your image, or you can do layer map. All right. So in here, I'm just taking the albedo from this layer map. So I can select the metalness. I can select the normals. I can select the displacement, and you can browse through all the maps you want. This is one great way to create your own textures and to just borrow from the mega scans that are already there. And as you can see, we have the various different layers here. So if I had more than this layer over here, it would show up here, and I could select that layer and I could pick up a map from that layer. I think that's really great. And you can play with the range of that here, how much you want to use of that map you loaded. All right, now what I did here is I brought in another mega scans just to show you a little bit about the normal mask stack. So for the normal mask stack, it's actually taking the normal map information. That's why you need to have something in here for the normal mask to work with. You need to have something from the normals, and this actually has what I'm in layer mask mode. Actually, let's just switch to active layer mask. So over here we have mesh only. In mesh only, nothing's gonna come through because, as you can see, this is just a plane. If I had an actual mesh that has different deformations, then it will try to inherit those normal faces from that mesh. But because I'm only working on a plane, it's not doing anything. If I switch to mesh and base normal map, is also not going to do anything because there's nothing there. Now, if I were to switch to underline mix, mesh current layers also not going to do anything because I don't have anything else here. But this one, as you can see, it's actually taking from the cracked rocks that we have underneath. So mesh and underline mix is actually going to take everything that's below, and as you can see, it inherited that normal map. So yeah, from the looks of it, it's not doing much because it's just a normal map, but you can utilize this as a mask. I think this is something very useful. And over here, you can control the angle of how is it being affected. All right, so you can switch here, or you can turn down the lighting direction over here. This is also good for some stylized stuff that we're going to do later. All right, now we're going to do a position gradient. So my position gradient is actually also affected by what's underneath. So this would be actually really good if we want to make some sort of a different mask with what we have below. And you can see that we can change the gradient where it's coming from. Right now it's coming from the top, or you can make it come from the side and just change it to whatever side you need it to come from. With these gradient position map, I usually like to keep it here so it comes from top to bottom. And again, it has exactly the same properties as the normal part. Alright, that is it for this video. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe. That really helps the channel. Share this video around, and I'll see you in the next video.